In Inside the Nazi State, I explore the mentality of supporters of one of the most brutal and racist regimes in all history. In this programme, you'll meet one of the last survivors of the early days of Nazism.
Ich bin glücklich, dass mir
I'm glad that I met Hitler, his best side. Surely he must also have dark sides. But I saw this wonderful side, and nobody can take that away from me.
And a Bavarian woman who has shocking views about her time as a teenager in the 1930s, living under Nazi rule.
I thought it was a good time. I liked it. We weren't living in affluence like today. That we didn't. But there was order and discipline.
And a banker's son who hurried to join the Nazi party straight after Hitler became Chancellor of Germany.
In 1933 you thought it was the beginning of a new German wonderful period, you know. We thought the wrong thing.
The three people I'd like you to meet in this programme have been selected from the hundreds of interviews that we've conducted over the last 10 years or so for a number of series about World War II. First person I want to introduce you to is this man, Friedlin von Spaun. Born in 1900, he was already well into his 90s when I encountered him in 1995, when we filmed him for a series I was writing and producing called Nazis: A Warning from History. The interview took place one winter evening in his small cottage in the Bavarian countryside. It was a memorable experience for me, for von Spaun had been present at the very birth of Nazism, amidst Germany's defeat at the end of the First World War.
Das Kriegsende.
The end of the war, what happened along with the armistice, was for me an extremely sad disappointment. Because at that time, like most boys then, I had patriotic feelings. In the end there was a collapse. Somehow I felt it like a slap in the face.
Germany's defeat in 1918 led to economic and political crisis in the country. Some on the nationalist right sought a scapegoat for the loss of the First World War and falsely blamed the Jews for the defeat. On the political left, others, supporters of communism, sought to orchestrate a revolution, an event Friedlin von Spaun wanted to witness.
I just had to see for myself how such a revolution is done. I was driven to Berlin by curiosity, and once there I threw myself into the tumult. The city was absolutely mad. Hundreds of thousands of people ran through the streets and were shouting.
Friedlin von Spaun went to hear Karl Liebknecht, one of the leaders of the communists, but he wasn't impressed.
Because of all the silly phrases which he chucked to the people, and the incredibly inflammatory statements, I noticed that he's not at all interested in creating a paradise for the workers. In fact, it's only a lust for power, and so, completely immune to all temptations from the left, I left the square an anti-communist.
Friedlin von Spaun joined the Freikorps, the right-wing paramilitaries who fought against those they considered Germany's enemies. It was groups like this who helped crush the communist revolution. And just as the Nazis were later to do, they made a crude link between communism and Judaism.
Actually, we also knew from Russia that the Jews there were in a very influential position. So in Germany, the impression gradually took hold, yes, Bolshevism and Judaism are the same, near enough. I find it very natural that a generally anti-Jewish attitude became widespread.
Friedlin von Spaun here encapsulates much of the embryo Nazi agenda. After the crisis and humiliation of the loss of the First World War, he feared the rise of communism, a creed he falsely linked in its totality to Judaism. Thus, to be anti-communist was inescapably, by this warped logic, to be anti-Semitic. What all this prejudice bubbling within him meant was that he was massively predisposed to listen to the extreme views of Adolf Hitler, another anti-Semitic, anti-communist. When he read Mein Kampf, Hitler's autobiographical racist diatribe, von Spaun felt he had found a soulmate.
Ich habe mich interessiert, was mit dem Hitler auf sich hat. Es waren auch wieder viele Sachen.
It interested me what it said about Hitler.
Positiv.
There were many things which I took very positively.
Friedlin von Spaun became a firm supporter of the Nazis and first encountered Hitler after he'd given a speech.
Da schaue ich auf. Tatsächlich.
And suddenly I noticed Hitler's eyes resting on me. So I looked up.
Und das war einer der seltsamsten
Indeed, he was observing me,
Momente meines
and that was one of the most curious moments in my life.
hat nicht misstrauisch geschaut.
He didn't look at me suspiciously.
Das Gefühl gehabt,
I had the feeling that he is searching somehow.
keinerlei Angst gehabt.
I wasn't afraid at all,
Den Blick sollte
but I have to admit it was hard for me to sustain his look for so
Da
long.
geschieht nun etwas. Das müssen
And
Psychologen.
then something happened which only psychologists
Der
can
Blick war
judge.
zunächst ganz auf mich
The gaze, which at first rested completely
ging auf
on
einmal
me,
durch mich
suddenly went straight through me to the unknown distance.
in eine unbekannte Ferne. Das ist so sonderbar gewesen. Und
It was so unusual,
den mir geschenkt hat,
and the long gaze which he had given me
vollkommen
convinced me
überzeugt,
completely that he was a man with honourable intention.
mit ehrlichen Absichten war.
I still vividly remember the moment towards the end of our interview with him when Friedlin von Spaun made those comments. It was almost as if he'd transported himself back to that time and was reliving what for him was some kind of, transcendent moment. But let's not be misled by this into thinking that Hitler had the same effect on everyone who met him. Friedrich von Spaun fell for him because he was already predisposed to believe in him and his racist beliefs. As the great German historian Joachim Fest put it, it's always the worshippers who make the idol. I think it's vital to remember that. The next person I want you to meet after the break, this man, became a follower of Nazism for rather more opportunistic reasons. In Inside the Nazi State, I'm looking at the mentality of supporters of Nazism. And this man, Manfred von Schroeder, is one of the most intriguing former members of the Nazi Party that I've ever met. I interviewed him in 1996 in Hamburg. He was an extremely intelligent and sophisticated individual, and began by telling me about his background of wealth and privilege.
I was born in June 1914, just before World War I, in Hamburg. We had a family-owned small bank in Germany, but an old one, founded in 1846. I first wanted to be a naval officer. Because of my eyes, that dream had to be given up. And then I always thought to be a diplomat, because I was very interested in politics, so I decided already when I was at school, if possible, to become a diplomat and study for that.
Did you join the Nazi Party yourself?
I joined the Nazi Party. At that time, the young people were enthusiastic and optimistic and believed in Hitler and thought it was a wonderful task to overcome the consequences of the First World War. So we were alle in high mood. In 1933, you thought it was the beginning of a new German wonderful period, you know. Waking up, don't forget that at that time we had 6 million unemployed, you know, and more or less civil war amongst between Nazis and communists, and probably everything was in order again. And so there was a feel of national liberation, of a new start, enthusiasm, except the people who were by their heart socialists, who were from the very beginning prosecuted and had to emigrate, or were in concentration camps. And so one knew of these concentration camps, and one really said, so what the communists would have done the same thing, and this is a revolution, huh?
What Manfred von Schroeder is saying here is really important, I think, because surprising as it may seem to us today, Germans like him had no problem with the existence of the concentration camps in the early days of Nazi rule. They convinced themselves that the Nazis were only imprisoning enemies of the state. And as for Hitler's overall racist ideology, together with his expressed intention to expand into Eastern Europe, well, Germans like von Schroeder simply acted as if their Führer didn't really mean what he'd written.
Nobody believed that Mein Kampf was of any importance. You know, they said, well, a young man has written a book. What do politicians think of what they have written 20 years ago? You know, so nobody took it really seriously. I have read it probably as a student once and didn't think it was very interesting, and then never opened the book again, you know. One should have done, but we didn't.
But Mein Kampf wasn't the only clue to the true nature of Nazism. In the 1930s, you only had to open your eyes to see the anti-Semitic actions of the Nazi stormtroopers, or read in the papers the laws which denied German Jews citizenship. Was it not obvious that even in the 30s, this was an evil regime like no other?
It should have been obvious, and you know that it has been obvious for many people who later became the famous representatives of the resistance movement. And the others looked away, which is a big shame. And then there was a sort of thinking, have you seen in history any revolution without nasty aspects on one side or the other? Think of the French Revolution. To be as a French nobleman in the Bastille was not so agreeable either. Because you had only 2 or 3 choices. You either could be a hero yourself and be a resistance man and risk your life, or you could emigrate. But if you wanted, as me, to serve your country as a civil servant, you had to make all sorts of compromises, and either you wanted to be a martyr or look away. Others, you couldn't do anything else. I wasn't brave enough to be a martyr.
Well, not being a martyr turned out to have some positive benefits for Manfred von Schroeder, who returned to live a prosperous life in Hamburg after the war. The final person I want you to meet in this programme also went on a distinctive and personal journey with Nazism. She's called Erna Kranz, and I met her in 1996 in Munich. On first impressions, she seemed a kind, considerate person, completely, for want of a better word, normal. Yet she had some surprising and shocking things to say, I think, about her experience during the Third Reich. Comments that made me realise on reflection that perhaps she was also one of the most honest people that I ever met on my travels. Like almost all of the Nazi supporters I encountered, she saw the economic depression of the early 1930s as a crucial reason for the rise of Hitler.
The Social Democratic Party, they failed somehow. There was great poverty here in Germany. We had a lot of unemployed people. That's the way it was. It was well known. People in employment, they were getting less and less pay. And of course, this brought about a general poverty for the majority of people. There was almost no so-called middle class left. Even though my mother came from a very good background, it was very hard for us. Well, let's say that we had to make things stretch.
then she witnessed a revolution.
Well, immediately in 1933, it was a shock at first, for everybody, I think, because nobody had expected it at all. For people who had never dealt with the party, or the Nazi stormtroopers, it was something completely alien.
Für den war es ein böhmisches Dorf.
It was in 1934 that you saw that something might be changing. It was a glimmer of hope for everybody. The salaries for civil servants and white-collar workers got better. Everything was improving a little. I only know about that time from our own personal situation as a household. It was getting better. They started the construction of the motorways, and all that provided work and took people off the streets. It definitely was a positive time.
How on earth is it possible, you might well be thinking, for someone like Erna Kranz to say she thought living in Nazi Germany in the 1930s was a positive time? Well, a clue, I think, is that in Nazi Germany, if you weren't in one of the specific groups the Nazis targeted, like the Jews, the Gypsies, or indeed anyone who opposed the regime, it was possible to live comparatively free from fear. This was unlike Stalin's Soviet Union, for example, where no one was safe from the knock at the door from the secret police. All of which meant, as far as a German like Erna Kranz was concerned, that as long as she thought only of herself, she could have a fine old time in Hitler's Germany. And for Erna Kranz, the highlight of this so-called positive time was appearing in a pageant in Munich in 1938, the night of the Amazons.
Das war ein Fest.
It was a celebration, and they wanted to recreate the hunting scene from the old legends.
But 1938 was also the year of Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, where Nazi thugs destroyed Jewish homes, businesses and synagogues. Hundreds of Jews died as a result.
It was a shock. It was a shock because, I would almost say from that moment on, you thought about things more. You see, at first you let yourself be carried along. You were carried along by a wave of hope. Because we had it better. We had order in the country. We had security. And then you really started to think. But it was a terrible shock.
But you didn't become an opponent of the regime?
No, no. That, no. That was the thing. When the masses were shouting Heil, what could the individual person do? You went along. You went along.
And she went along in the autumn of 1941, when German Jews were forced to wear the yellow star and the deportations began.
In the street parallel, we had a Baroness Branko, who was married to a baron, and she was a Jewish shopkeeper's daughter from Hamburg, and she had to wear the Jewish star, and I was so sorry about that. It was so terrible because this woman was such a nice woman, and that's what you felt. But really, just like today, when you get away from people in need, you can't help everywhere. It was the same then. You said, what can we do? You couldn't do anything, could you?
It's easy to come to the view that Erna Kranz should have known very well what to do, which was never to support the Nazi regime in the first place, since from the very beginning the Nazis were anti-Semitic, anti-democratic and fundamentally racist. But in ending this programme, I think it's also only fair to say this, that Erna Kranz's story struck me at the time, and still does today, as being an all too human response to the circumstances around her. It can be all too easy, can't it, if personally one is doing just fine, to look the other way when bad things are happening to others.